A racist cop pulls Denzel Washington over on the road and demands he open the trunk, but what he finds inside turns the whole situation upside down. It was a quiet night in Los Angeles, the kind where the city's usual hum was muted, and the streets seemed almost deserted. Denzel Washington, the iconic actor known for his grace and poise, was driving home after a late event. The calm of the evening matched his mood as he cruised through the city in his sleek, black car. The headlights from his vehicle illuminated the empty streets, casting long shadows across the pavement. He was dressed casually in a hoodie and jeans, a stark contrast to his usual public persona. The air inside the car was cool and crisp, with only the low hum of the engine filling the silence. Denzel felt at peace, his thoughts drifting as the road stretched ahead of him. His mind was on the day's event, the conversations, the applause, but mostly, he was just looking forward to getting home. He turned up the volume slightly, letting his favorite tunes fill the car as he navigated through the quiet city streets. But just as the peace seemed perfect, the flashing red and blue lights suddenly appeared in his rearview mirror. At first, Denzel thought it was just another car behind him, but then the unmistakable glow of a police cruiser caught his attention. His pulse quickened as he glanced in the mirror, seeing the officer tailing him closely. The sound of the siren cut through the night, pulling him out of his tranquil thoughts. Denzel's heart rate increased slightly, but he remained composed. This wasn't the first time he'd been pulled over, and he knew the drill: stay calm, stay polite, and comply. He signaled and pulled over to the side of the road, the tires of his black car skidding softly on the pavement. The calm night had been shattered, and with it, Denzel's unease grew as he braced himself for what was about to come. As Denzel Washington sat in his car, waiting for Officer Jim Ridge to approach, the unease in the air was palpable. The siren had barely faded when the officer stepped out of his cruiser, his boots hitting the pavement with a sharpness that seemed to echo in the quiet night. Denzel kept his hands on the steering wheel, his mind calm but alert. He could already sense that this stop was different from others. Officer Ridge walked up to the car with a cold, almost judgmental posture. His eyes scanned Denzel's vehicle, lingering on the sleek black exterior and polished rims before moving up to Denzel himself. The officer's gaze was sharp, critical, as if trying to find something to justify his suspicion. The moment their eyes met, Denzel knew there was something wrong. Ridge didn't just see a man, he saw a stereotype, a wealthy black man in an expensive car, and that was enough to set off a chain of assumptions in the officer's mind. "License and registration," Officer Ridge demanded in a clipped tone, his voice cold. Denzel handed over his documents, his movements slow and deliberate. He remained calm, knowing that any sudden movement could escalate the situation. But it wasn't just the routine request that made Denzel tense, it was the officer's eyes, calculating, as if expecting something to go wrong. As Ridge glanced at the documents, his eyes narrowed, and without a word, he took a step back. "Open the trunk," he ordered, his voice sharp. There was no explanation, no reason for the request, just a demand. Denzel was taken aback. This wasn't a standard procedure. He had done nothing wrong. But Ridge had already made up his mind, assuming that the car, its owner, and everything about the situation must be suspicious. Denzel's heart rate picked up, but he refused to let the frustration show. He knew this was racial profiling, and the thought of being treated differently because of his appearance was unsettling. However, he kept his face neutral, aware that the most important thing was to de-escalate the situation. He took a deep breath and complied, knowing that arguing would only make things worse. As he walked toward the trunk, Denzel kept his posture relaxed, his movements deliberate. He could feel the officer's eyes on him, his every action scrutinized. Ridge's attitude was increasingly hostile, but Denzel refused to give him any reason to escalate things further. This wasn't just about a simple traffic stop, it was a test of patience, composure, and dignity in the face of unjust scrutiny. As Officer Ridge approached the car, the tension in the air thickened. His demeanor remained icy and disapproving, a clear indication that this wasn't just another routine traffic stop. He had already decided in his mind that Denzel Washington wasn't just a man on a late drive home, he was a target, and the officer's instincts were fueled by his own assumptions. Ridge stood by the window, his eyes scanning Denzel's face for any sign of guilt, his hand hovering near his holster, ready to escalate at the slightest provocation. Denzel sat still, his hands firmly on the steering wheel, resisting the urge to roll his eyes or question the absurdity of the stop. He knew better than to get angry. Every part of his being screamed that this was racially motivated, that he was being unfairly targeted simply because of the car he drove and the color of his skin. But he had learned the hard way, arguing with an officer like Ridge wouldn't help. It would only make things worse. As Ridge demanded the usual documents, license and registration, Denzel handed them over slowly, his movements deliberate. He gave the officer no reason to think he was anything other than cooperative. Ridge barely glanced at the paperwork, his eyes flicking back to Denzel, a sneer forming on his lips. "You in a hurry, Mr. Washington?" Ridge asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. Denzel could feel the officer's condescension in his words. He wasn't just questioning Denzel's actions, he was trying to provoke a reaction, to make him seem like he was hiding something. "I'm just trying to get home," Denzel replied calmly, keeping his tone neutral. He didn't rise to the bait. The officer wasn't interested in hearing his explanation. Ridge didn't even try to make small talk, he had a mission, and it had nothing to do with a traffic violation. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle," Ridge said abruptly, his voice harsh. There was no reason for such an order, but it was clear that the officer was determined to escalate the situation. Denzel's mind raced for a moment, but he remained calm, opening the door and stepping out as instructed. "Turn around, hands on the car," Ridge commanded, his voice low, almost menacing. Denzel followed the officer's orders, placing his hands against the cool metal of the car. He knew the drill, no sudden movements, no backtalk. He could feel the weight of the officer's scrutiny, the judgment, and the hostility behind the routine questions. Ridge began patting Denzel down roughly, his hands moving over Denzel's body with more aggression than necessary. It wasn't just a search, it was a power play. The officer's touch was not just methodical, but filled with contempt. Denzel's body tensed under the invasive contact, but he remained still, refusing to give Ridge the satisfaction of reacting. He knew this wasn't about finding anything illegal, it was about humiliation, intimidation, and control. "You got anything illegal in there?" Ridge asked, his tone laced with an accusation. The officer's question wasn't just routine, it was a thinly veiled suggestion that Denzel might be hiding something. The assumption that because he was a black man in a luxury car, he must be guilty of something more nefarious hung in the air like smoke. Denzel, holding back the frustration that threatened to rise, took a deep breath. "No, officer. I have nothing to hide," he replied calmly, his voice steady. "I'm just trying to get these supplies to a community in need." Ridge didn't seem convinced. He motioned toward the trunk. "Open it," he ordered flatly, as though he had already made up his mind. Denzel didn't flinch. He knew that refusing would only fuel the officer's anger, so he complied. Denzel walked over to the back of the car, the weight of the situation settling deeper into his chest. He clicked the trunk open, and as the trunk slowly lifted, Ridge's flashlight illuminated the contents. The officer's gaze flickered from box to box, searching for something that might justify his suspicion. Denzel knew the contents of the trunk were innocuous, nothing illegal, just supplies for a local charity. But Ridge wasn't interested in facts. He was looking for an excuse. Ridge's eyes narrowed as he picked up one of the boxes. He ripped it open roughly, revealing medical supplies, bandages, antiseptics, and over-the-counter medications, each item clearly labeled. Denzel's heart pounded, but he stood still, silently waiting for the officer to make his next move. "What is this?" Ridge asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "It's a charity delivery," Denzel replied calmly, his voice measured. "These supplies are going to a local community center. They've been hit hard by the recent storm and are in desperate need of medical aid." Ridge didn't seem satisfied. His hands rummaged through the box, scattering items across the pavement. "This your idea of charity?" he scoffed, picking up a solar-powered charger. He sneered, clearly unconvinced. "You expect me to believe this?" Denzel didn't respond to the accusation, his gaze steady. This wasn't about defending himself, it was about proving that Ridge had no right to treat him this way. Ridge continued his search, opening more boxes. Each one contained bottled water, portable generators, and clean water filters, items meant to bring relief to families struggling to recover from the flooding. As Ridge opened the last box, revealing a stack of blankets, his face shifted from skepticism to surprise. The officer paused, his suspicion starting to fade as he took in the contents of the trunk. The items were clearly meant for people in need, and Denzel wasn't hiding anything except goodwill. Ridge closed the trunk with a soft thud, his expression a mixture of confusion and reluctant acceptance. For the first time, the officer's demeanor shifted. His hostility softened, but only slightly. He hadn't found what he was looking for, but Denzel knew that this wasn't over. Ridge had already made his assumptions, and it would take more than a trunk full of supplies to change his mind. "Anything else?" Ridge asked, his voice losing some of its edge. "No, officer," Denzel replied, his tone unwavering. He wasn't angry anymore, he was simply ready to move on from this senseless encounter. Ridge stood silently for a moment, as if weighing his options. He hadn't expected to find anything, but his need to maintain control still hung in the air. Finally, he gave a short nod, signaling that the situation was over. Denzel closed the trunk, his body relaxing as he walked back to the front of the car. He could feel the officer's eyes on him, but now it was clear, there was nothing more to be said. The moment of tension passed, but the weight of the encounter remained. As he got back into the car and drove away, Denzel couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a traffic stop. This was about something bigger, something deeper that went beyond assumptions and prejudice. And though the search had come to an end, Denzel knew the work was far from finished. As Denzel closed the trunk and walked back toward the front of the car, he could feel the officer's eyes on him, scanning him with a mix of skepticism and something else, something that felt like a shift. The moment that had begun with tension and aggression now hung in the air, thick with uncertainty. Ridge hadn't expected what he found in the trunk. What he thought would be a quick opportunity to intimidate and control a man in a luxury car had quickly turned into an unexpected challenge to his own biases and assumptions. Denzel knew that Ridge wasn't going to let this go so easily. The officer's hostility had been so palpable, so quick, that Denzel was prepared for Ridge to turn the situation in some other direction, even now. But he was also determined to stay calm. He wasn't going to be another victim of unchecked prejudice. He wasn't going to let Ridge walk away thinking he had done his job just because the supplies weren't what he expected. He had to give the officer one last piece of clarity, one final lesson in assumption. "The supplies in the trunk," Denzel said, his voice low but firm, "they're for a local community center. A lot of families have been displaced by the recent flooding in this neighborhood. They're in desperate need of basic resources, things like clean water, medical aid, and shelter. I'm just the guy delivering it." Ridge didn't say anything for a moment. The words hung between them, slowly sinking into the officer's consciousness. He was used to making quick judgments, but Denzel's calm demeanor had given him pause. He had expected to find something to use against him, drugs, weapons, or anything that could prove his suspicion right. But what he found instead was a man helping people, a man trying to do something good. For a long moment, Ridge didn't speak. The officer's eyes flicked back to the trunk, then to Denzel. He was processing the information, but it was clear that his assumptions had been shattered. The rough, uninvited probing of Denzel's life, the padded-down search, the questioning, the accusations, all seemed suddenly out of place. Ridge had expected to confront a criminal, but had only found a man doing the right thing. The stillness of the night settled again, but it was different this time. There was no hum of authority, no smug certainty from Ridge. Instead, there was a silence filled with realization, discomfort, and guilt. "You," Ridge began, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant, "you were just trying to help?" Denzel nodded slowly, his expression softening but still serious. "Yeah. That's all I've been trying to do. Deliver these supplies to people who need them. To help them rebuild their lives after a disaster." He paused, meeting Ridge's eyes, holding the officer's gaze with a steady and purposeful look. "I wasn't hiding anything, officer. I'm not the criminal you thought I was." Ridge swallowed, his gaze falling to the ground as if ashamed. The weight of his own actions began to sink in. He had treated Denzel as a suspect based on nothing but his car and his appearance. He had assumed that because Denzel was black, driving a luxury car, there was something to hide. And now, confronted with the reality of the situation, Ridge could no longer ignore the truth. Ridge started again, but the words were slow and unsure. He looked around, as though trying to find something to say that would make this situation right. "I didn't know." Denzel stayed silent for a moment, letting the officer's words hang in the air. Ridge's reaction wasn't enough to erase the damage already done, but it was a start. The uncomfortable truth about how deeply ingrained assumptions can be in law enforcement was out in the open, and it wasn't going to disappear overnight. The officer shifted, his stance slightly less aggressive, but still guarded. He wasn't apologizing, not verbally at least. The weight of his actions was more apparent in his body language, in the way his shoulders seemed to drop, in the way he hesitated to meet Denzel's eyes for long. I'll make sure your papers check out," Ridge muttered after a long pause, his voice tinged with reluctance. He wasn't offering an apology, but there was something more genuine in his tone now, a sign that the initial hostility had softened, that he was reconsidering his approach. Denzel didn't respond right away. There was no need. His silence spoke volumes. It wasn't about being vindicated, it was about showing that things needed to change. That people shouldn't be treated this way just because of the way they looked or the car they drove. As Ridge began to gather the necessary paperwork to wrap up the situation, Denzel stayed where he was, steady and composed. There was no need for further confrontation. He had delivered his message, and now it was up to Ridge to do the hard work of confronting his own assumptions. By the time Ridge finished checking the papers and getting back in his car, the entire moment had shifted. The officer's once unshakable stance was now tinged with hesitation. He hadn't expected this turn of events, and for once, he was forced to confront the reality of his own biases. Denzel slid back into his car, the night air now a little quieter, a little less heavy. As he drove away, he knew this was just one small battle. But it was a necessary one that may have begun to plant a seed of change. As Denzel drove away from the scene, his mind was still processing what had just happened. He had handled the situation with calm and grace, but the impact of the officer's actions wasn't lost on him. As he headed to his next destination, the silence of the night was broken by the sudden buzz of his phone. A quick glance at the screen showed him a news alert. At first, he thought it might have been related to his charity work or a new film project, but as he read the headline, his stomach tightened. A video had surfaced online, showing the entire exchange between him and Officer Ridge. The footage, recorded by a passerby across the street, had quickly gone viral. What had started as a simple traffic stop had turned into a full-blown public spectacle, with the officer's behavior being captured and broadcast for the world to see. The video showed Denzel's calm composure in the face of injustice, while Ridge's aggressive questioning and blatant assumptions were apparent for everyone to witness. The comments section of the video was flooded with reactions. Many people praised Denzel for staying cool under pressure and handling the situation with dignity. They called out Ridge for his racial profiling and abuse of power. The video sparked an online conversation about racial profiling, systemic racism, and the treatment of black people by law enforcement. Celebrities, activists, and ordinary citizens joined the chorus, demanding accountability and a re-evaluation of how law enforcement officers interact with marginalized communities. Denzel knew this moment was bigger than just him. It wasn't about him being a famous actor. It was about the issue of racial profiling and the way black people are treated differently in everyday situations. Denzel had spent years using his platform to raise awareness about inequality, and he knew that now, more than ever, his voice had the potential to bring about real change. In a subsequent interview, Denzel addressed the situation head-on. He explained that while he had hoped the encounter would be a routine traffic stop, the reality was far more complicated. "What happened to me that night isn't an isolated incident," Denzel said. "This is a pattern that too many people in communities of color face every day. It's a reality that black men and women know all too well. But just because it's familiar doesn't mean it's right. We have to change this." Denzel emphasized that law enforcement needed more awareness and education, particularly when it came to understanding and addressing implicit bias. He called on police departments to provide better training for officers, to focus on de-escalation tactics, and to ensure that community engagement was prioritized over suspicion and hostility. "It's not enough to say we're sorry after incidents like this. We need action," he continued. "We need systemic change." The actor also urged other public figures to use their platforms for good. "We all have a responsibility to stand up for what's right," Denzel said. "Whether you're a celebrity, an athlete, or an ordinary person, your voice can make a difference. We need to use our influence to educate, to demand accountability, and to push for a future where everyone, no matter their skin color, is treated with respect." Denzel's call for change resonated with people across the globe. He had turned a personal incident into a catalyst for a broader conversation about racial justice. The support he received was overwhelming, and many law enforcement officers and community leaders joined the conversation, pledging to work toward a more equitable and just society. As the video continued to circulate, Denzel's message became clearer. This wasn't just about one bad cop or one bad experience. It was about changing the culture that allowed these incidents to occur in the first place. Denzel's ability to turn an uncomfortable and difficult situation into a learning moment for millions was a testament to his character and his unwavering commitment to making the world a better place. Through his advocacy, Denzel helped to spark a conversation that would continue far beyond the viral video, pushing for tangible changes in the way law enforcement operates, and inspiring others to take a stand for justice. The story of Denzel Washington's interaction with Officer Ridge resonated deeply with people around the world. What had initially seemed like a personal confrontation soon became a powerful symbol of the broader issue of racial bias in policing. As the video of the encounter went viral, it sparked widespread conversations on social media, in news outlets, and in communities everywhere. The incident shed light on the harsh reality that many people of color face when they interact with law enforcement, a reality shaped by assumptions, stereotypes, and prejudices. This story, while it began with a high-profile celebrity, soon transcended beyond celebrity culture and became an important discussion about the systemic issues affecting communities of color. It wasn't just about one traffic stop, or one bad cop, but about how racial profiling continues to affect everyday life for many individuals, regardless of their background or accomplishments. People from all walks of life, including celebrities, activists, and ordinary citizens, joined the conversation, acknowledging the need for change. Denzel, as always, refused to shy away from using his platform for the greater good. The incident became a pivotal moment in his advocacy work, propelling him further into his efforts to challenge racial inequality and fight for justice. Denzel continued to speak out, using his voice to advocate for broader systemic changes within law enforcement. He began pushing for the implementation of anti-bias training, better community engagement practices, and a more comprehensive approach to policing that emphasized fairness and equity for all people. Drawing from his own experience and the public's response, Denzel launched initiatives aimed at bridging the divide between law enforcement and marginalized communities. He stressed the importance of awareness and education, not just within the police force, but throughout society. Denzel's focus was clear: breaking down the stereotypes that have been ingrained in society for centuries and working toward a future where everyone, regardless of race, has an equal opportunity for respect, fairness, and safety. The broader impact of Denzel's story wasn't just in the conversations it sparked, it also prompted real-world actions. Many police departments began reviewing their procedures and policies, and several public figures and organizations partnered with Denzel to advocate for reforms. The momentum that began with this one story was only the beginning of a much larger movement that aimed to reshape the way society views and treats people of color, particularly in the face of authority. Through this journey, Denzel proved that the power of a single voice, when used with integrity and purpose, could challenge deeply rooted systems of injustice and pave the way for change.